All right, let's jump into this deep dive. We got some fascinating stuff to unpack today. It's all about defamation lawsuits, and it looks like they're increasingly targeting media companies and even politicians.
Yeah.
We've got a conversation between two journalists to dig into. They're dissecting some really high-profile cases, and I got to say, I'm already sensing a theme here. Media accountability, or maybe the lack of it.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that these cases, they could actually signal a pretty big shift in how we think about media responsibility, which is something, honestly, a lot of people feel is way overdue.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so right off the bat, these journalists, they bring up the CNN settlement. Do you remember that? The one where they decided to settle instead of fighting a defamation case when it got to the punitive damages stage?
Hmm.
I mean, CNN's a huge name in news. Why would they back down from a fight like that?
Punitive damages, man, that's where it gets real. They're not just about, paying someone back. It's about sending a message. Think about it. A company like CNN, their reputation is everything.
Right.
Punitive damages could just wreck them. Not just financially, but, their whole credibility as a news source.
Okay, so the stakes are way higher than just money. But what was this case about specifically?
Well, basically, they were accused of having a double standard for what they put on the air versus what they publish, online. Apparently, they were a little more, I don't know, relaxed with their on-air stuff, which seems kind of backwards, right? You'd think they'd be more careful about what millions of people are watching live.
That area is surprising. I mean, you would think live reporting would be where they'd be extra careful.
Yeah.
So is this CNN case part of a bigger trend we're seeing?
These journalists, they seem to think so.
Hmm.
They're arguing that for years and years, there's been this feeling that major media outlets, the big names, they could basically say whatever they wanted without any real consequences.
Like they had a free pass. But hold on, don't we have laws about this stuff? I mean, there are laws against defamation, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have those laws. But the thing is, proving defamation is really, really hard. You have to show that the statements were false, that they were made knowingly or with, reckless disregard for the truth. And on top of that, those statements actually hurt the person's reputation. So it's a very high bar to clear, and it takes a ton of resources to even try.
Which, of course, big media companies definitely have, so they could just keep things tied up in court forever.
Pretty much. And then there's this other layer. It's the whole free speech thing. Nobody wants to stifle real journalism or, critical commentary. So there's this hesitation to even bring defamation cases against these media giants. It's a super delicate balance.
Okay, so it's free speech versus accountability.
Yeah.
But then you have a case like George Stephanopoulos and ABC. They paid a pretty big settlement to Donald Trump for defamation. That must have been a huge wake-up call for the media world.
It definitely spooked some people, especially after that CNN settlement. And the thing about the Stephanopoulos case, it wasn't just a one-off comment or anything. This was about repeated claims he made on air, which kind of suggests a pattern, right? Not just a slip of the tongue.
Yeah, that does sound a lot more intentional. And then the journalists bring up the whole Russia collusion coverage during Trump's presidency as another example of potentially reckless reporting. But how would that even work in a defamation lawsuit? It seems so complicated.
Oh, it would be a total legal nightmare. Proving defamation in a case like that, it's ridiculously difficult. Even if some of the reporting ended up being wrong, you'd have to go through mountains of information, separate opinion and interpretation from the actual facts. It's just not a clear-cut situation.
So it's a super fine line, and sometimes it's just blurred. Like, where does opinion end and a statement that could be defamatory begin?
That's exactly what makes these cases so fascinating. They force us to think about the boundaries of free speech and the responsibility of those who, shape public opinion.
And then there's a recent example. AOC calling Trump a rapist. The journalists we're looking at, they say it's pretty obviously defamatory, especially given that Stephanopoulos case, right? But don't politicians have some kind of legal protection?
They do, but it depends on the context. If she'd said that on the House floor, during session, she'd be covered by immunity, but she said it personally online where that protection doesn't apply.
So it's not just what you say, but where you say it. It's like a whole new layer of complexity.
It really is, and especially with social media and everything, it's just a whole different ballgame.
And speaking of online platforms, let's switch gears a bit and look at the case against Netflix about their Baby Reindeer documentary. Remember that one? They got hit with a lawsuit for basically presenting false information as fact.
Oh, yeah. That's a mess. But isn't Netflix more about entertainment? They're not, hardcore journalists. Does the same level of scrutiny really apply to them? That's the question, isn't it? But in this case, It seems like the journalists are saying, look, it doesn't matter if it's a news show or a true crime documentary. You still have a responsibility to check your facts, especially if you're presenting it as, the absolute truth.
So even if it's meant to be entertaining, you can't just make stuff up and then be like, oh, it's just a show.
Apparently not. And this whole thing about blurring the lines between truth and fiction, it's especially relevant now with all the information overload we face, right? Think about everything we see online. It's tough to tell what's real and what's not.
Which is exactly what these journalists are worried about.
Yeah.
They're saying this my truth thing, it can't be allowed to override actual facts. And that goes for everybody, not just journalists, politicians, influencers, anyone with a platform.
That's a really important point because if we let truth become completely subjective, then we lose trust in everything, institutions, experts, each other, and that's a dangerous road to go down.
It's like we're losing touch with a shared reality, right?
Yeah.
If everybody has their own truth, how can we even talk to each other, let alone solve any problems? This is where it gets really interesting for me. What does all this mean for you? How do you, as someone who's clearly following this topic, how do you navigate this whole shifting landscape of truth and information?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll definitely keep exploring as we go deeper into these cases and what they mean for media accountability. It's not even just about avoiding lawsuits, is it? It's about something bigger, like maintaining a healthy information ecosystem. If we can't even trust the information we're getting, how do we make, informed decisions about anything? It affects like everything from personal choices to how we participate in democracy.
So it's like we all have a responsibility to be more careful about what we, consume and share, not just for ourselves, but for society as a whole.
Exactly. We need to be on guard against misinformation, disinformation, and just like the erosion of trust in reliable sources. Look at the stuff you gave me for this deep dive. Some of it's from established news organizations, others from less traditional places. It's a mix, just like how we actually get information these days.
It's true. We're just bombarded with information from all sides all the time, and it's hard to filter out the junk. Do you think we need like a whole new set of rules, ethical guidelines for this digital age, something to help us navigate this overload?
It's not a bad idea. We need to be way more critical about how we engage with online information. How do we verify sources? How do we even tell the difference between opinion and fact? These are skills everyone needs, not just journalists or academics.
It's almost like we need to become like digital detectives or something. Always on the lookout for clues to what's really true. Develop our own BS detectors.
I like that. Skeptical, but not cynical, right? Open to different views, but not gullible. It's tricky. And these journalists we're talking about, they seem particularly worried about how this my truth mindset impacts like political discourse.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, if politicians can just ignore facts and appeal to like pure emotion, what happens to actual debate? How do we find common ground if we can't agree on the basics?
Exactly. When politicians disregard facts, just play to emotions and ideology, it undermines the whole foundation of democratic debate. It's like they're creating their own realities where facts don't matter, only their narrative.
It's kind of scary if you think about it. If we can't agree on basic facts, how can we even have a conversation, let alone a productive one, about important issues? It just leads to more division, more polarization, and then nothing gets done.
Right, and that's why it's crucial to hold our leaders accountable for the information they put out there.
Okay, but how? How do we actually do that?
Yeah.
Push back against this misinformation wave and, like, hold those in power responsible for what they're saying?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's going to take a lot of effort on different fronts. We need to support fact-checking groups, teach people how to evaluate media, and engage in civil discussions that are, based on evidence and logic. And that starts with each of us.
So we can't just complain about it, right? We have to actually do something, get involved, and demand better from our leaders and even from ourselves.
Absolutely. It's up to each of us to be informed, to be engaged, and to be picky about the information we consume. We can't just passively accept whatever we see online or hear from, our favorite news source. We have to actively seek out different viewpoints, question our assumptions, and think for ourselves.
So it's about being critical thinkers, not just like information sponges that soak up everything, right? We have to question everything.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The future of our democracy might actually depend on our ability to navigate this information landscape, which is just getting more and more complex. Look, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this, but you're here doing this deep dive, which means you're already ahead of the game.
You're right. Taking the time to understand these issues is a good first step. But what else can we do? What are some, like, concrete things we can do to be better digital citizens?
It's not always about these huge sweeping changes. It starts with the small stuff. Everyday choices. Pay attention to where you're getting information from. Are the sources credible? Do they have a good track record? Are they open about their biases?
So it's like doing a background check on the information itself, not just accepting things at face value.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to be a little suspicious. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If something makes you angry or outraged, take a second, step back, and think about why.
Yeah, it's like you catch more flies with honey and all that.
Yeah.
But honestly, sometimes it's hard to stay calm, you know? When you see this stuff just spreading like crazy, it's infuriating.
I get it. It can be super frustrating. But you got to remember, the goal is to help people understand, not to win an argument, right? Think about it. How do you feel when someone's aggressive with you versus when someone's respectful, willing to listen?
Good point. It's about having a conversation, not like a fight,
Mm.
but sometimes it feels like we're just talking past each other, especially online.
Yeah, that's the echo chamber problem, isn't it? We all surround ourselves with people who agree with us, and then we just tune out anything that challenges our views.
So how do we break out of those echo chambers? You can't exactly force people to listen to different perspectives.
You can't force them, no. But we can set an example by being open ourselves, hearing different viewpoints, even if we don't agree with them, and just trying to have conversations that are respectful, even when the topic is tough.
So it's like we're all diplomats or something, trying to find common ground, build bridges across these divides.
Exactly. And I think these journalists, they remind us that this whole thing, finding truth, demanding accountability, it's a process. It's not like we reach the end. It's a constant journey. We're all learning and changing, and how we see these issues is going to change too.
So it's not like we can check it off our list and be like, okay, I'm a responsible digital citizen, I'm done. It's about always paying attention and being honest with ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And being willing to learn, to grow, to adapt, because this information world, it's not slowing down. Who knows what's coming next? But if we stay engaged, stay curious, and so focused on truth, I think we can figure it out together.
It's like we're all students in this like school of digital citizenship, always learning new stuff, facing new tests.
And the most important lesson, we're all in this together. The health of our information ecosystem depends on all of us. Each and every one of us has a part to play in making sure truth matters and that people are held accountable.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to walk away with?
I want them to remember, truth matters, facts matter. And it might be hard, but that search for truth, it's absolutely vital for a healthy democracy, for a society that works.
Well said. And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What do you think? Do these lawsuits mean we're moving toward more accountability? Or are they a threat to free speech? Head over to our website, hit us up on social media. Let's keep this conversation going. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.